diversification. We have been hearing it for the past decades in budgets, in discussions, as the alternative to what we have already been facing and continues to face, where our economy is pretty much based on oil and gas, and that segment has its issues worldwide. Dr. James, now, one of the questions I would ask is, a typical fiscal package for Trinidad and Tobago is between 50 and 60 billion. Did I get that right? Usually. Who drives diversification? Is it that somebody says, we want to diversify into agriculture, we're going to give agriculture the biggest pie, let's diversify? How does diversification actually happen?
Well,
or should?
The budget is a reflection of the proper answer to that question, because the budget has a component that we call the development budget, or the investment component, which is a fluctuating variable part of the budget. The recurrent budget is based on the establishment we have in place, and that's very, very stable over a long enough period of time. So it's in the development budget that you have the flexibility to do something about the underlying reasons we get into trouble. Remember, what's happening here is that the economy gets into trouble because it's too dependent on the energy sector and linked manufacturing, I might add. So if you want to change that, you have to recognize the leading role of government in that. All economies that operate like Trinidad and Tobago would require good government policy, including investment policy, in order to change the structure of the economy over 20, 30, 40, 50 years, looking down the road. And you start that now by going into the budget, having put together your plan, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years, Vision 2030 was a 15-year plan. So having put that together, every year you invest a little bit towards diversification. And it hasn't been working. So we're going to have to revisit that now on the camera. But to revisit it, you have to know why it hasn't been working. And that's a very deep question. But it is this business of the government investment program in Trinidad and in Tobago, I might add, that ties the diversification issues to the budgeting exercise.
But Dr. James, you said it has not worked in terms of getting the economy to diversify, even as I would think you think they are trying. What would be some of the issues? Is it the policy that is not working? Have we not chosen the right industries to diversify into? What could possibly be the problem why we are not further ahead in diversification, even as we have spoken about this for the past 20 or 30 years?
The past 70 years. Right. So look, the real problem is, as in all human things, the first basic problem is ignorance. It's the way we understand the problem. And if we don't come up with an adequate interpretation of the problem of excessive dependence on oil and gas, we will hit around, fish and fiddle, and do the wrong thing, and therefore not get diversification. And essentially that's what has been happening. Not for the lack of desire to get it, but for the lack of the information required. Now, what is the right information? To get the right information, you got to go back to the foundations of the economy, how it's set up, how it works. Now, the foundations of our economy are scary, to tell you the truth. Because although oil and gas look shiny and pretty jewelry, the basis on which our economy works is the resource base, including our human resources. And when you look at that, what you see in Trinidad and Tobago as a whole, 60% of our workforce is undereducated. And in the case of Tobago, that's 68.3%. Now, you have to learn lessons from that. You have to learn the right lessons from that data as to what to do to diversify the economy. And those lessons are pretty basic. If you take that data as background, the most expensive things we can do are things like agriculture and things
Tourism.
like retail activity, government make work programs, and so on, because they are low productivity activities. So they are very expensive to do. Now, the cheapest things we can do, the lowest cost things we can do, are things like education and healthcare and creative activity, the musicians and those kinds of people, financial services and so on, because they are the most productive things we do. So they are the cheapest to do. Meaning, if you took a farmer from agriculture and put the farmer to teach, right, what you're giving up is a very small product from the farmer. And what you're getting is a high product from the teacher. But if you took a teacher with a high product and put the teacher to farm, what you're giving up is the high product of the teacher. So that putting the teacher to farm is a more expensive thing than putting a farmer to teach. That's the basic rule. And if you understand that, what it tells you is that if you want to succeed in the world, you have to produce and export the cheapest things, and you have to buy from the world the most expensive things.
But
So therefore, you have
how do you balance that, Dr. James? Because somebody listening to you now would say, Dr. James want to say we moving farmers to teach how we go eat.
no, we're not saying move farmers to teach. We're just measuring the cost.
Measuring the cost. Okay.
We're measuring the cost. So that's how you understand your costs. And
Okay.
therefore, given that, there are things you have to do. If anybody stays in farming, you have to raise the productivity of farming so they could make a better living.
Ah, there we go.
If you're
Okay.
staying in retail, you raise the productivity of retail. If you're doing CPEP, you raise productivity in that.
Understood.
That's half of the development rule. But the other half of the development rule is that you produce education to export some. You don't just produce education for local consumption, which is what we're doing in the country. You produce healthcare for export. You don't just produce just to meet local needs. That's the mistake we're making. Even the creative industries where the musicians and so on understand they have to export, we don't have any systematic, adequate program to build their capacity to export their fare all around the world. So it's just local curiosity.
Okay.
And of course, you bank for Trinidad and Tobago. We don't do export of financial services. If you want to see where you could export financial services, go to Cayman Islands, go to Bermuda, go to Bahamas, and so on. Now, remember what that means. When you export those things, you have a double effect. You're making foreign exchange,
But
but on the other side, you're bringing people from the rest of the world to stay a long time in your society, and that boosts domestic demand. And that encourages, therefore, productivity in agriculture and all those other areas, productivity in retail and all of that, good customer service and stuff like that. So the consequence of doing this rationalization of your production for export is that you're growing the scale of your society on the demand side. The number of people living in Trinidad and Tobago would include those who come in as long-stay visitors. That's how you will double the population of Tobago, for example. They come in to go to school, they spend a year, 3 years. That triples the population and creates demand for everything we're doing in the society. And it is the failure to understand that and to do that underlies the failure to diversify.
Okay.
Right?
So
So
one of the
that's the
things
problem.
one of the things, well, not one of the things, one of the critical things you noted is that this has to be done under a developmental part of the budget. If we bring it home to Tobago, we know that Tobago has the same issues. We get a significant amount under recurrent, and for the last 5 or so years, I think the most we've got for development is 300 million. Can Tobago do diversification on its own, or does it require a national policy that would trickle down to Tobago to allow for Tobago to get to where it needs to get?
No, that's right. It cannot. It cannot because there are direct barriers. The direct barriers block the development of tourism, block the development of the professional services for export that I was just describing. And the more we depend on oil and gas, the more those barriers strengthen. That's the record we have, that's the data we have. So the consequence of that is you need carefully calibrated national policies to shift the focus. So you need, for example, for the government across the board to agree that as a country we're going to move towards production of education for export. We may locate the production institutions in Tobago, but we as a country have to put programs in place to go to talk to Harvard, to go to talk to Yale, to go to talk to Cambridge, Oxford, and say, oh, come and team up with us to put a program in Tobago here, to bring all the students to Tobago to go to school. They can come here and do what you are doing that Trump is trying to block right now. Trump is telling them we're going to cut the number of foreign students by half. Well, the foreign students want to go to Harvard. Where do they go? Okay, you say to Harvard, come, let's set up a campus right here and let's team up and produce something that they could come to with Harvard stamp, with a Trinidad and Tobago flavor as well. And they'll be able to go to the beach because they're right here in the most beautiful place in the world we call Tobago. So that is the way you have to think about it from the point of view of getting that out of the way. It can't be Tobago trying to do that on its own. It won't work. They wouldn't have the clout, they wouldn't have the budget, they wouldn't have any of the information required to do that properly. That's why the THA has been a failure for 44 years. It cannot diversify because the structure of the national economy blocks development in Tobago. And the key to that is government policy. It is the way government makes policy as a country that sets the basis on which you could succeed with the development of tourism. So you know how long we've been dreaming to develop tourism here. It can't work the way we're doing it now. To get it done, we have to make national policy. Or Tobago has to secede and make national policy on its own. Either you have a way to make national policy in an integrated democratic way, the way you pay attention to the voice of Tobago, of course, as part of a big part of the way you set up the government. Or you have to have your own full capacity to take the decisions required to set up a proper economy. You can't have it both ways. Either you have to secede as Tobago, or you have to democratize the country so Tobago's voice makes sense in the national policy making process. That we have never understood that for 70 years. We only now have the data, only now. I've only just run those models for the UN. It's only now we know exactly what the barriers are to diversification and the way we have to team up. And the biggest lesson from those models is that it takes national policy, inclusive policy, and it cannot be done in Tobago alone by saying we are going to develop tourism. The national policy picture will block you. And that's why Tobago has never succeeded. We've been trying it for 44 years, it's 45 years, it's never worked.
Okay,
We've never known what we know now.
Okay, and you don't think there's any other way that it is possible for Tobago to be able to lead the charge in that diversification?
Well, you can lead from Tobago, of course. If you have competent, capable, politically clever people in the THA, you can take this kind of information I'm sharing with you, including the modeling, to the central government, and you meet with the Prime Minister once a month. Anyhow, you sit down, you say, let's look at this, and you can lead from Tobago, but remember that ultimately has to translate into what cabinet decides and what the parliament passes as law and all of that sort of stuff. So effectively, you're substituting the prime ministership of Kamala for the prime ministership of Fali, and Kamala would not allow that. That's not the way our government works right now. Our government now is an authoritarian government. Kamala is the queen. And the consequence of that is she cannot be seen to be giving up her prime ministership to Fali. The consequence of that, in turn, is that you get the same old-fashioned authoritarian policy making that, I mean, ever since Kamala came into power, you've seen it, no? She governs exactly now the way Rowley governed. Go to cabinet, make a policy, come out, announce the policy, in a very strident way, perhaps, with whatever political flavor you want, and then you go down the road. And that, of course, is a prescription for failure. But Tobago could lead that if we had the knowledge here. I see no evidence that the knowledge exists here, except up in Easterfield.
Okay, Dr. James. So the next question I wanted to ask you is, should we expect anything different in the budget once read? Now, we're assuming it's going to be read on Monday. The Prime Minister has not made an announcement as yet, but based on the time frame that is required to get it all done before the deadline at the end of October, the expectation is that the announcement would be made today, that the budget would be read on Monday. So the question would be, should we expect anything different than what has happened before? The format usually stays the same. The format has never changed. But besides the content in terms of who is going to be awarded what and what sweeteners there are going to be, and that, should we expect anything different?
No. Not at all. You can't expect anything different if the decision-making process is the same old. And you can't expect anything different if the pressures in the context of that authoritarian decision-making process remains the same as we see them in front of us. Government will try to guess its way out, and it would go for the old conventional solutions, you make grand pronouncements and grand stands and so on. But the science-based approach that I am talking about is not available to the government right now. We've built the models and we have the answers in the analytical form and with data that can be shared. But remember, to put that to use in making policy, you now need an inclusive process in which Tobago will have a voice, Naparima and Caroni would have a voice, the East-West Corridor would have a voice. The parliament is not set up to make policy that way. So they'll just go ahead and do win inside policy, opposition just oppose, and then you'll just get the same old dictatorial politics we have had for the last 70 years. This system was rigged up by Williams and Robinson, and we're reaping the whirlwind from it now.